Samantha, really excited to have you on the show. Welcome to Product Growth Stories and your journey from luxury retail to leading commercial strategy at 42 is fascinating. So I'm really excited to just dive into it. What inspired your transition in the first place to go from a retail executive to retail tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
I'm really excited to be here. And in terms of my career journey, I think that I always have a curiosity to challenge myself and do different things. I actually used to be a chemical engineer back.
Oh, I was a chemist one day too. Wow.
I went chemical
Yeah.
engineering, actually beauty for a little bit, fashion executive to tech. So I think it's just part of my career trajectory in a lot of ways of always challenging myself but I think they all kind of link in this very interesting way back together. I would say going from a retail executive to tech, some of that was just really that I actually moved to the Bay Area, which is the tech haven, as
Mhm.
everyone knows. But how I got into retail tech and what I do here at 42 is actually pretty natural progression because we focus on apparel companies. Most of our customers are like I used to basically would have been a customer essentially at 42. So I have a really good understanding of the needs of the customers, what they want, what they need, the language that we use. And I
Yeah.
actually had an experience actually when I was the president at the Couples, where I went from not having any sort of analytics business platform to having one, changing that was for me. And so when I was approached by 42, I really understood the value that they were bringing to brands. And obviously, I have a really interesting way of communicating that because I used to be in their shoes.
Yeah. So you know what it feels like. And can you
Yeah. I
talk a
mean,
little
every
bit
day everyone says to me, like, oh, they describe to me their certain situation. I was like, oh, yeah, I used to be there.
yeah. And what I'm curious, like, what was that transition like to have? Let's talk about Couples, for example. Before you had that kind of data visibility to after, what did that enable you to do, and what kind of strategies did that unlock?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, like just the speed in which you get information. Before we had any platform, we were deep in Excel. I used to always remember like there was this one spreadsheet that my team used, and you'd have to close like everything on your computer for it to not crash when they used it. So it was just like
Yeah.
your
Every
Excel.
data is shoved in this one sheet.
Yeah, and they would just spend hours and hours doing, like, different data pulls, but just to get, like, one view of the business, right? And then someone would bring that to me when we talk about it, but I'd always
Yeah.
have lots of questions, right? You're like,
Yeah.
"Well, what happened in Mercer? What happened online? What happened in women's?" Right? And so they'd have to go back and do more data pulls, more exports, that kinda stuff, and then, by the time we got some information, it was maybe, like, Wednesday, Thursday
Yeah. Yeah.
real decision. And everyone knows like you do most of your business on the weekends, right? So you're always planning for what does the business need for that coming weekend? Like, how do we react to it? So once we had a BI tool, first of all, I had data at my fingertips. So
Yeah.
it, for me personally, very life changing because I could, in many ways, answer my own questions and then be able to come in on Monday and already know what I want to talk to the team about in terms of execution of how we're going to make decisions in terms of stock availability, allocations, markdowns, promotions, things like that.
Mhm.
I always describe it to my now potential clients as this will be life changing because
Yeah.
it was really like that for me. I felt like I suddenly had access to data that I did not have before. We could really drill down into really deep granularity, which you can do in 42. And
And when you don't have those tools, I'm just thinking of special projects I've been a part of where you had to answer some question with data. It's always like a little challenge. Like you have some basic, easy to state statement, like a business question. And then that turns out to be an annoying project to figure out like relevant data. And then once you get the answer, you immediately have the next obvious question, which is like this very slow loop. So
it's
it's
like,
lovely.
well, it's kind of a circular kind of iteration in a like 42. It's like literally click at your fingertips. And you're like, okay, my women's business was this. okay, we were up 20% until last year. Why? And then you click on women's, and then suddenly you have this like deeper view of like product category, but then you can jump to SKU or to stores. And so it's just, it's to be able to do that and think through like how you would analyze your data and what you want to know about your business, because the brand knows like the levers they have to pull. They
Hmm.
just need to get to the place where they're like, okay, let's send more stock to the New York store. Let's transfer stock out of LA into this other store. Okay, we have the new collection coming. Let's push more product to New York. Things like that, right? You know what you can do. You got to
Hmm.
make data to make those decisions.
And just, and I'm sure people who are in retail would know this, but since I'm not in retail, like what are the major expensive, just strategic one-way choices you have? Is it around moving stock around? Like what options, what plays what can you do other than
There's
price?
So you always think out, so inventory is a huge part, right? Because essentially you want to have the right product in the right place at the right time. When the customer, wherever they are, you want to provide them with that, and you don't want to be out of stock. You want to have their size, whatever. And the other part of it is a promotional strategy, right? Like kind of saying, okay, so, before we could only do these blanket across the board promotional strategies. And then once we had more insights and data, like maybe you could just do it on a product category. Maybe you could do it on, you're like, okay, we haven't sold enough of, I don't know, coats, let's say. So let's try to push that. The other levers you have are from a visual merchandising perspective, it's huge in the store. So let's say we're trying to push something, right? And so we can give that information to the VM teams and say, hey, let's really push dresses this week.
Hmm.
And can you guys come up with the VM for the stores and the windows this week? And really just within the store to kind of help push that. But you need the data for all of that.
Makes sense. And then I'm just imagining other businesses I've been a part of that I understand around that have inventory. It's like the inventory expires at some point, and I have a feeling that it's a little bit the same. Is it the same with fashion? Because at some point it's out of trend. Do you have an
Yeah, it's
expiration
seasonal.
date?
Yeah, so seasonal.
Yeah.
So we think of seasons, right? We have a fall, winter season and spring, summer. They start like fall, winter. Actually, technically, it usually starts around like June, July is when you start to put that into yours because you mark it down like the holiday periods, right?
Mhm.
And then spring, summer starts around February drops, and then you have monthly drops. And yeah, so in the sense of an expiration, it's more about almost like it's a kind of attached to the weather, right?
Yeah,
Because
that
people
makes sense.
actually
It's like
buy,
a yeah, of course.
like it obviously depends on where you live.
Yeah.
You buy to the weather outside, and you want to make sure that like what you are delivering in those moments are reflective of the weather in the
Yeah,
moment. And
that
if
makes
it's
sense.
not, say you missed winter and your coat's all delivered too late, well, then you won't sell that coat.
Yeah,
Then you have an overstock problem, which is another problem.
got it. Okay. How are you measuring success for your partners? What's your measure of success for them?
At 42,
Mhm.
I think first is I think the way we look at it is like their ability to replicate the current views that they currently see across the business. So when we initially onboard a client, there are various ways that they want to look at their data. And I make sure that we can make that happen for them, right? Through conversations, through the onboarding process, things like that. But then for me, what I think the power of 42 is like, how do you give them more than that? How do you get them to see that actually like that baseline category report that you create every week can be so much more impactful because you can drill down into the store level, the item level, things like that. And so for me, like once we are able to educate them to have them see that there's so much you can do within the platform, that for me is like a huge measure of success. And then
Mhm.
obviously from a revenue perspective, right? That they like can react to their profitability faster. You can see that their sales grow. Like we see sales increases from like 10 to 25% after we've implemented 42 across the business. There are like direct revenue impacts that I think
Mhm.
personally, like that's a huge goal for me is that these really see what more they get out of versus just using Excel reports.
Yeah. This reminds me of just the benefits of having a great partner in general. They help you ask questions you didn't know you should be asking. You come with, I have a vague sense of a problem, and somebody, a real expert that's done it many times before, can show you, you should be asking this question actually.
Yeah, like sometimes I Like, I don't work at these companies, right? They're our partners, but I can go into their dashboard and learn so much about their business in 5 minutes. And so when I come to them, I'm like, oh, okay, this is how I would use your information. So to help them really understand how to analyze it, like in the platform, that's like a huge win for them. And they're like, oh, I always tell people, like, I will
Yeah.
you're gonna change your life. I promise.
Yeah. And what are the patterns around successful retailers' use of data? I'm sure that the most successful brands are using this kind of technology. There's some patterns there. What are those?
They're faster, more reactive. Their profitability margins are better. They understand that they have the ability to get the stock in the right place when where they need it to be. And then I think in a bigger picture that there is one view of the business within the 42 platform that is used across the organization. So you almost lose those silos because before you have a platform like ours, actually like some teams look at the numbers differently actually.
Of
Like
course.
kind of like
Yeah.
yeah, their version of net sales is different. So when we onboard a client, it's like you actually have to make them choose in some ways.
Yeah.
And so you end up actually identifying for the partner, like all the like the one way that the organization will look at the data and you normalize that for them.
That's
It's
got to
actually
be
very powerful.
enormous for
Yeah, it's like
collaborating across.
powerful. Yeah. And so what ends up happening is that the C-suite is using 42 all the way down to the sales associates, but everyone's speaking the same language. No one's, wait, that's not my number.
Yeah. My
Whereas,
net sales are higher, actually.
yeah,
We count it different.
and it's
Yeah.
very but it helps to jumpstart those conversations, right,
Hmm.
internally to just to make those decisions. And then we really become like the source of truth across an
Hmm.
organization. And for me, that's like the best way that 42 can be utilized is when it's like literally for everybody.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And is there a certain like an amount of, say, retail locations that you would need to really get the most benefit? If you have one location and your mom and pop store, is it still make sense, or is there a certain like
Yeah.
market segment that you're really
So
aiming at serving better?
I is what I always call like the invisible work that we do. So whenever you have two sources of data, you automatically needed some version of a data warehouse, right? And so as you get more complex new sources, things like that, you start to add that. And so we actually become the data warehouse for the majority of our brands. Some brands already have a data warehouse, and then we become visualization platform for them.
Hmm.
Or figure out there might be a subset of the business that 42 makes more sense for in the larger organization, let's say. But I would say in large part, it's that once once you're, like, outside of your let's say e-commerce platform and you add something you need some other version of data, either ERP system, POS, quite valuable.
So at the size where you would think about an ERP,
Yeah,
I'm curious, like what size is
but
that?
the thing is that we do work with some smaller brands that are just, what they Shopify and
Hmm?
Shopify.
Yeah. Okay.
And in
So
that
wide.
case, we have a pretty wide in that case, it's like we're enhancing the reporting Shopify provides, for example. And I think if you're like a Shopify e-commerce,
Mhm.
one of the biggest benefits is that you will now have access to your inventory snapshot every single day, which we wouldn't have in Shopify.
Yeah. Sure. That's
And having
huge.
historical data mapping is huge for anybody.
Yeah. When you think about 42, like what do you see as the most challenging part of B2B, getting B2B customers in 2025?
I think that like to bring them on to 42, you mean?
Noted to acquire like net new customers. I'm curious, like
Oh,
what's,
our internal challenge?
yeah,
A little bit depends on how I just described. We can work with like smaller brands to
yeah,
larger enterprise brands, right? We can run the gamut. I think with smaller brands, it's often like it's like budget constraints, right?
yeah,
There's a little bit of budget constraint, especially in this current
climate,
economic climate that we
yeah,
are in.
volatility. It's the theme.
Yes. And there's a lot of unknowns these days. And I would say for larger organizations, it's about identifying because they have data teams they have tech teams and it's evaluating how we are complementary to their tech stack
Hmm.
versus they seen it, right? Like in smaller
Yeah,
brands, you become their
yeah.
tech. ways, right? But in larger, you're complementary to whatever tech stack exists.
Yes.
And the challenge is always making sure that you're having the right conversations with the right people and that they see the value that you can provide within their ecosystem. Because you can't go to someone and say, oh, we're going to replace everything because it's not.
Not an enterprise.
Could, right? We could do
Yeah.
that, right? In some ways, but like,
We'll just tear it out.
it just doesn't really make any sense, I
Yeah.
guess. And
Yeah. And I imagine that's really bespoke for each company. So it takes some time to figure out like where does this fit in to what is working with all the, because they're obviously trying to solve the problem to some extent. So it's not all broken. So you have to dovetail in.
it's like, I don't know, like most things, it's listening to them and saying, like, even in larger organizations, they still are, and many of them, very heavily dependent on Excel, actually.
Yeah.
And as much you might think that that might not be true, but actually it is. It was fun prospect. They actually they said they spend their Sundays doing their business analysis because they have these meetings on Monday morning.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling them like, oh, we could probably end that.
You could have Sunday back, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but and then I think the other thing too is I think there's often like a fear of change, right?
Yeah.
Of like sometimes when something's working, while it could be very time consuming, but they know how to do it and they know where to get the information from. And I think there's sometimes a little bit of a fear of the unknown. And also, when I say to someone like, it's going to change your life, right? You're going to go from what you're doing now to maybe spending 10 minutes on getting that same report. Let's be 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
I think people don't believe me. Like sometimes like, it sounds like too good to be true. In some way.
Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know because it's this weird thing that happens when you become expert in some tiny little piece of the world and then you go elsewhere that this is done and people have these very strong opinions. Then they're not, it's just one tiny small bit of their company and it could be horribly broken. And like I talk to people, there's people out there that believe marketing like this doesn't work. Like, I don't know. It could be you're
You?
doing it wrong because some
Yeah,
other
exactly.
people. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
But
It's hard
it's,
to like, right? It's like it has to be like a mindset shift for me at the top. Like
yeah.
I was all in on that because I was like, I could tell this can change my life. And so
Yeah.
I was all in on it. So my team was all in on it.
Yeah.
Right. And we became like the poster child of how to integrate this system across the company because
Hmm.
and so it does sometimes start at the mindset shift.
Yeah.
Has to be at the top to like really make sure you execute it so there's less resistance.
Yeah.
And then I think as the vendor, it I really like I'm very transparent of what we can and cannot do. And I listen to them and I'm like, okay, we can make that happen. That's not a problem. And I can show them and
Mhm.
ways how to do it. And I think that there's a trust in me because I used to be on the brand side.
Yeah, that has to help a lot.
It helps a lot because they understand that I'm like, oh, okay, this is how I would look at it. And this is what I
Yeah.
do. It's like a
This
little
has
bit of
been a fantastic. I'm curious, like, what is it that makes you the most excited about 42 in 2025?
I think all of the growth opportunity, honestly, I think I joined the company only 8 months ago and I see so much potential for us to really grow just as like a company. And then I think the second thing is all of the newness that is in our roadmap and the pipeline, or as most tech companies are
Yeah,
jumping up the AI
of course.
train.
You have to. Yeah.
Not to. But I think we're doing it in a thoughtful way that is actually going to be quite helpful and really insightful for brands. We're going from there's just here is your data, right? To like, what do you do with the data? Like, what are those insights, right? And making sure that we give valuable, insightful analysis. So I think I'm excited about that. We're thinking about what's the next step for 42 in terms of the customer journey, predictive forecasting, the potential for all of those to be quite successful with our current client base, but also for new clients. And I think and one of the things is like what I always tell everyone was like, give this breadth of knowledge across this company in terms of the number of different systems that we can integrate with, right? So there's this bespoke part of what we do in terms
Hmm.
of a service like a really breadth of clients and things like that. So there's just a lot of awesome opportunity to really, and I get excited about that kind of stuff. I like growing a company. So I feel like I'm coming into this company at the right time to really let it take off.
Excellent. Thank you so much.